This is Let's Talk About Myths, baby. And I am your host, Liv, here with definitely absolutely the raciest episode I've ever recorded. And oh, what a joy it was. Today, I am joined by my friend, and I would like to clarify that we are friends. I did not inflict this upon a stranger. Cosi Carnegie. Cosi is a master's student at Cambridge and generally just an incredibly fun person. Being Australian helps, but it is also just Cosi, who joined me to talk, oh my gosh, everything. Boob cups were the beginning and originally were supposed to make it into the episode title until we got to the concept of Charybdis just being a gaping and hungry hole. Spoilers for some of the best parts of the episode. Oh my god, we had so much fun talking about the ways in which ancient male fear manifested in how they spoke about and visualized and generally understood women. From things like the fear of paternity, like what it meant that women could hide who the father of a child was. Oh, the horrors! All the way to Scylla and Charybdis. I've always, been interested in them as women, but it had escaped me just how sexualized they are. Apparently I need to be looking at everything with a slightly hornier eye. I have learned my lesson. Which is all to say, this episode has a lot of sexual content. For once, we don't talk about assault, I don't think. So that's something. Basically, the ancient Greeks were super horny and simultaneously super afraid of the power that women held. Just biologically. The power of the uterus, I should say. They were really afraid of that thing. This was such a joy of an episode. If you can't already tell, I just re-listened to it again and we had such a great time. That said, I wish I'd let Cosi talk a little bit more, but I was going through some stuff and this is how I handled it, apparently, as ADHD went wild. I also just want to add a couple of clarifications for things that come up in this episode. First, I did mention the Medusa book that I am working on, and I said that the call for short stories is still open. I don't believe that's true. But if you're interested in this Medusa book that is in the works by me, and the reason I've been having my brain explode even more than usual lately, and also is featuring a ton of short stories, you can check that out. It's on Flame Tree Press. It's still a ways out, but I think you can look into it if you are at all curious. I also want, speaking of Medusa, to add a clarification. There is a point where I talk about my least favorite Greek myth retelling books, like one of those anthology compendiums of like all quote-unquote Greek myths, and the author says some really dumb stuff about Medusa that remains dumb and super patriarchal and super misogynist. But one thing that both Cosi and I thought was like completely made up technically is not. There is a reference in Pseudo-Apollodorus. It's like this fucking final sentence. Literally, it's like the entire story of Medusa, and it's like all of what we think and know, the normal stuff. And then the very end, he's like, some people say that actually she said she was prettier than Athena, and that's why she was cursed. And like, that's literally the whole of it. So it is still absurd to write that additional sentence into the actual plot structure of the Medusa myth. That is still absurd and contextually wrong and egregious, but it isn't technically coming out of nowhere. And on that note, let's just dive right in to the horniest episode of this podcast. Just in time to finish off Women's History Month, we are looking at the threat of a horny woman. Conversations, Charybdis, a gaping, hungry hole, Fearing the Monstrous Woman with Cosi Carnegie.
Do you need me to do like an intro, or are you just gonna like intro me in the recording and be like, this is Cosi, she's Australian and swears a lot. Welcome to the fucking show.
I might cut that out and put it somewhere. We talked in Athens. We met it for the first time. That was so fun. Even though we've known each other for like probably 5 or 6 years.
Oh my god, what do you say?
Oh my god,
like
I found one of the mugs. Or you sent me one mug, I guess. I forgot I even had it. I like was going through my cupboard the other day and I pulled it down. I was like, oh, this is so cute. And it's like some goddess on the front and then it just says Cosi's Odyssey on the back. But it was very cute. I was like, that was fucking years ago. You would have sent me that one.
That was the Hestia mug. That was like 3 years ago.
Yes.
That was 3 years ago. That's insane.
I love it. Yeah. And then I still have like the little branded condoms that like sometimes just like pop up somewhere in my apartment because I'm just like, you've sent me enough that I've just kind of like stashed the places.
People just send me unsolicited photos of the condoms in their hands, just in my DMs. I'm like, happy for you. Stay safe out there. Woo!
I mean, I think that's the perfect introduction to just generally having you on the show. Though, of course, today's episode isn't about Codibos. We'll leave that as just a little Easter egg for future recordings.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
But like, I feel like we were just sitting at dinner and I was like, you should come on my show. What could we talk about? And then you told me a whole thing that frankly, I've forgotten most of, but I just remember thinking I would like to talk to you about this on the show and I could fit it into Women's History Month. And that is the extent of my memory on the topic. But like, have you written something recently? I know it was sexy. Do you remember? This is a very casual conversation. I'm keeping all of this in.
Okay, thank God. I do remember we were talking about what I wanted to write my thesis on and hopefully my PhD on. And so what I was blathering on to you about was the connection between the female body and drinking vessels, and particularly like the way that they facilitate not only containment but also consumption, and how there's a sort of connection between the female body's ability to disrupt boundaries and kind of mess with everything, and that there's a sort of kind of appetite associated with the female body that can be kind of seen in the visual imagery and the vessels themselves. I think that is what got you excited.
Heck yes. And so it was, I mean, this was off mic, I think, but I'm just going to point out that it was particularly relevant that I just showed you my little Cantharos that sits behind me while I record, and which shows Cersei having transformed a man into a pig, and he's like holding a cup, just waiting for more. And now it feels even more relevant.
It's absolutely relevant. And I think what I wanted to talk to you about was, have you heard of mastoid cups?
No, but based on the word, I've got an inkling and I would love to hear more. I love etymology. I feel like I can pick stuff out. Yes, I'm ready to be right.
You know what's going on. So it is exactly what you think it is. It is this breast-shaped cup that they used to drink from, and it had a nipple on the bottom.
Just a boob cup.
Just a boob cup. They were I don't know if the term boob cup has made it into scholarly journals, but if it hasn't, it should.
Well, it's going to be in the episode's title, so we'll get it started.
Okay, boob cups. So they were these sort of incredible things that they would hold them in their hands and they would drink from them. And I mean, whether you want to think of it as like a very kind of erotic, suggestive, sensual thing, or if it's just like calling Dr. Freud, I don't know which way you want to slice it. I'm not presuming to, I'm not judging anyone. What's that horrible phrase? I'm not yucking anyone's yum, but it's like, I feel like I can't not address that just like a tiny bit.
Yeah. Okay. I'm trying to picture it. So is it kind of like a write-on in that you look at it and you think like, how would you set this down and have it not spill? Because now I'm thinking of like a nipple on the bottom of a cup just feels incredibly impractical for like, I don't think this is gravity, but I don't do science. But you know what I mean. Sitting something down on a surface when it has a nipple on the bottom just feels like it's going to be a little unsteady, which reminds me of like, when they drink out of like a goat's head in a write-on or something, and you're like, how do you set that down? Do you have to chug it all at once? What do you do?
I think so just visually it's similar to a skiffos, and I don't know if you can add some images to this episode, but it's sort of this sort of size, and it does, exactly as you were saying, have that sort of weird nippled bottom, which does make it really impractical. But also some kylixes had nippled bottoms. There's a whole thing with ancient drinking vessels where they would give them kind of body parts. So vases would have, feet and lips and faces, and it's, they were very into the vase has a body. But with the mastoi cups and other cups where you couldn't really put them down, that sort of played into the drinking party or the symposium. So it was all part of the theatre of it all and the kind of challenge of masculinity. And exactly as you said, would you have to chug the whole thing? I mean, probably.
Yeah.
Like realistically,
just
probably.
Practically speaking, yeah.
Yeah, like where are you? Do you nestle it in some dirt in the andron, maybe? Do you nestle it in another person?
Are they keeping dirt in their androns? Are you do nestle? I cut you off from saying, do you nestle it in another person?
I mean, I don't presume. We know they all got up to all kinds of shenanigans at the symposium, so God knows what they were capable of when it came to their drinking vessels. We have some harrowing visual images of satyrs doing unspeakable things to cups and jars, so
Well,
it's not out of the
realm.
realm. Yeah, I know, satyrs, what are you going to do? Yeah. But it's not outside the realm of possibility. But yes, everyone listening at home, please Google mastoi cups.
Yes! Oh my god, well, I'll, when we have a promo for this, Michaela will certainly find pictures. I know that by this point she will have already searched and found them. But like, I mean, that's a joy. I love the drinking tradition, but I also am so fascinated by like these connections with women in such like powerful ways, but then simultaneously, and like I don't know, location wise, but I imagine so much of what we have comes from Athens, that like, so they're just like doing all these things kind of in seeming reverence to women, but then they're also like, you don't get to be people though.
I mean, I completely agree in that there are so many different ways to look at it, right? And you can look at it as a beautiful way of like enshrining the female body and worshipping the female body. But also, if you flip that, isn't it just the most absurd form of objectification? Just I mean, I wish, trust me, I want to believe that it was all this, oh, she's on a pedestal, she's on a pot, but it's like, no, you are not only an object in this way, we will drink wine from you. Welcome to ancient Greece.
It's like doing a shot where, like, out of a belly button, but like ancient Greek style.
Worse, worse and more extreme.
Yeah, because also, like, if we're talking symposia, then there would be minimal to no women involved who weren't, sex workers in some way. So, like, and I mean, heterae, I think, get a bad rap, but like are very fucking fancy, well-off ladies who, just were companions for gifts. And like, I think nothing wrong with that in a world like Athens. I feel like it's probably the only way I would want to live, quite frankly.
Oh, truly. I would prefer to be at those parties rather than stuck at home.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I feel like if I had to pick a life, specifically in ancient Athens, like 100% I want to be a Phryne. I don't want to be just like a lady in the house,
A Phryne would be,
right?
That would be a moment. That would be a moment. I'm not saying it's without complexities, but it would be a moment.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, ancient Greece, if anything, is complex as all shit, and sometimes we have to just find little joy in pretending that things can be simple and not quite so awful.
Yes. We can just rose-colored glasses the whole situation.
Exactly. So, okay, like other than the boob cups,
Mhm.
like what have you looked at in terms of like women's bodies and drinking or like any I mean, I love this idea so much. I'm also not going to pretend I'm not getting ideas for my novel.
You know that makes me so happy. Um, I mean, I think what sort of got me thinking about this was looking at all of the myths and the imagery that depict female monstrosity. And
Mm.
then, right, and then coupling those with all of the very, very explicit images we have of heteri in wild, unfathomable, seemingly physically impossible orgies and sexual situations from the symposium. And then I was sort of looking at those two sets of images, and it got me thinking that there might actually be something similar happening here. And then I wondered what that was, because the female monstrosity stuff has been looked at a lot. You know, we're talking about Medusa, we're talking about Scylla and Charybdis, we're talking about the Sphinx, you know, that's all sort of quite familiar stuff. But then when it comes to scholarship, oddly enough, the fancy professors haven't been rushing to look at the porn as much
Weird.
as I know, knock me down with a feather. And so in looking at those two sets of images, I was trying to figure out, you know, what they might be telling us about the ancient sort of imaginary when it came to the woman and the female body. And so then I started thinking about appetites and sexual appetites and thirst and then actual physical hunger. So if you compare the sort of hypersexualized depictions of the heteri with Charybdis, the gaping, forever hungry whirlpool, I'm,
Why have I never thought of Charybdis this way?
I mean, she's my favorite. I think about her way too much.
Me too. Like I actually wrote about her for a thing that I don't think has like been officially announced, so I won't say it, but like I got to
Oh,
write
oh,
about
oh,
her a
oh.
little bit. Like I was given a list and just like asked to pick, and I was like fucking Charybdis, even though I was like, I don't know how I'm gonna, you know, like there's not a lot to say, and now I realize I missed saying that, which was good. This is for kids, I think. But like
Yeah, leave that one out.
yeah, but I love her. Like I think that she really is so interesting in that way of like she is like nothing but also fascinating, and also like a she despite the fact that she is a gaping hungry hole,
Exactly.
which now I'm thinking a
Exactly.
lot more about.
Like she's feminized, and then it's so there are so many connections here where like the feeling of arousal and kind of erotic emotion is so closely associated with liquidity, and Charybdis is in the ocean, right? And then you have Scylla, who has dogs coming out of her waist. Women were called bitches a lot in ancient Greece, and that was associated with their like hypersexuality and their sexual appetite. So it's like you have these two female monsters that men have to travel through, and they both have these kind of erotic, hungry, monstrous aspects. It's just, oh, blows my mind.
Yeah, I love that. I just so much. You've forever changed my two of my favorite monsters. Because I don't really
I
count
hope in a
Medusa
good
as a
way.
monster. Absolutely in a good way. Like I just think Skill and Charybdis are so interesting generally with that, even without that, that now I'm like, oh, I'm obsessed with you guys.
Yeah,
Because
they're
I
my
also think
faves.
I mean, me too. Like they've always been my fave because they're just like this fun little duo where you like always have to, it's always Scylla and Charybdis. And Charybdis has always just been fascinating to me because it's just a fucking gaping whirlpool. But now, oh, now I have so many more thoughts.
I think in the Odyssey in a day, I literally call them like a toxic pair of female friends. Like teamwork makes the dream work. That's literally them.
No, 100%. They work together to kill everyone, and I love it for them.
And they're horny and they're scary.
Yeah,
And I love it.
I never thought of them as horny, and now I'll never forget it. And I just think, yeah, they are so much more interesting.
I think it's just when you read, I think it's Aeschylus who is talking about Clytemnestra, or it's maybe Homer talking about Helen, but calling them dog-faced or bitches
Yeah,
as like a
yeah.
clear reference. I think it's in Emily Wilson's introduction to the Odyssey, where it's a clear pulling on their sexuality as part of, saying horrible things about them. And so then if you look at Scylla, it's like, what's all this then?
Yeah. Okay, now I just want to know about all the horny women that I've never seen as horny because I've just been reading the wrong shit. Like, okay, so I
feel like you need some time to process. You're like,
truly, this happens a lot, but it's rarely about something quite so joyfully weird. So I'm working on writing I forget when it's coming out, but there is a call out for short stories about or featuring Medusa, like of any kind, just fiction generally. It's by Flame Tree Press. You can go look for it if you want to submit anything. But I am writing the I forget what we're calling it, but like it's kind of an introduction, but it's like it's like almost 30,000 words. So like it's going to be a good long introduction about Medusa as a character and her cultural history and
wow,
and I was thrilled to be asked to write it, not least because it means that my name is associated with Medusa in any kind of way. But like I've been just at this point just doing some like really surface level looks into, like, I obviously know the ancient sources pretty front and back when it comes to Medusa, but I don't have as great a grasp on like her, over the last 1,000 years, say. And so I was like looking for more kind of contemporary understanding of her. And I found this video on YouTube by the History Channel. And it is terrifyingly hot garbage. Like, just incredibly wild. Like, its most egregious thing is just the conflation of Ovid with Greek myth, and this like the thing that people love to do of like telling a story that only Ovid is evidenced for writing about and pretending like that's the Greek myth. And so there's all this talk of Greek myth, and then it's literally all the stuff that is exclusive to Ovid. And like there's nothing wrong with Ovid as a source, but it is, cut and dry not Greek myth. We don't have any evidence that like parts of that story, actually appeared in Greek myth, blah blah blah. But like, they also had all these like male talking heads and one woman. A couple of women. So that, there's these all male talking heads who are just like going off about Medusa and saying these things that just sound like Freud. Like they sound like,
really?
Freud's interpretation of Medusa, this idea that she was this, this feared monster where, men fear like a powerful woman. I'm trying to remember all what it was. I just remember being like shocked that it was like such psychologizing for a character like Medusa, who like objectively, and this is why I'm bringing it up because I'm so curious your thoughts, but like to me, the ancient Greek sources as we have them, and I would say like the visual representations as well, do not give us any indication that Medusa was like a creature that was actively feared by men. Like, in Hesiod, she's literally said to be like just, the only mortal Gorgon. She suffered a woeful fate is the translation that I have completely memorized. And Perseus killed her. But there's literally nothing about her being dangerous, causing any damage, even being monstrous, or like literally really any details about her. And if you go through the surviving Greek sources, like there's really nothing in terms of her being a danger to anyone. Like the entirety of the story is that Perseus needed to bring back her head because, Polydectes wanted him dead, and so was like, go get me Medusa's head as a gift, and he just figured it would kill Perseus. Like that's the whole of it. It's not like, like a lot of times people will talk about Medusa and they'll be like, well, she, was terrorizing the lands, and so like she needed to die. And I'm like, there's literally not a single line in a surviving Greek source that says she did any damage whatsoever, like while her head was on her body. Like, sure, he used it as a weapon, like that's not on her. I don't know what people are, it's just fascinating to me. But these men talking about it who were scholars were like, they were definitely putting their own anxieties about women like into this History Channel piece about Medusa, because I was like, as somebody who knows the ancient sources, like absolutely not to mention that a Gorgon was then used as a protective, like it's apotropaic.
Yeah, well, that was exactly, I think, 2 points to what you're saying. And the
Yeah.
first thing I think that complicates exactly what you're saying about the written sources is it was, the Sibyl, the Gorgoneon, it was apotropaic and it was protective. And it's so difficult to trace back like how exactly that visual would have functioned because it was frightening. It was supposed to be frightening. It's on Athena's shield. It was supposed to be scary.
Yeah.
Like that much we know. That much is, a part of it. So it's, and then if we go into kind of the psychobabble world, which I personally love, so it's the Greeks taking something frightening and something scary and something that is feminine and feminized and putting it on their houses, on some of their drinking ware, and kind of inviting a part of it in as a way of protecting themselves. So it's a very complicated thing. I think anything that just says she was just a monster and that's that, it's so one-dimensional.
Yeah. Well, and I'm really fascinated by the idea that, like, for all we have, like, everything you're saying about the Gorgonion, I never know how quite to pronounce it, but, like, on the shield, on the Aegis, like, definitely meant to be scary. Like, all those Gorgon faces with the tusks and the tongue out and the big eyes and all of this, like, absolutely meant to be scary and all of this, and, in addition to what you're saying about apotropaic. But, like, for the most part, when it comes to those types of representations, like where it is explicitly a Gorgon, it's often not like obviously the shield has this kind of mythological backstory of being Medusa's head, once off her body. But outside of the shield, like it's, and even like in Homer versus Hesiod, the shield is just a Gorgon. It's just a Gorgon. Like the actual connection to that scary Gorgon face being Medusa is not as explicit as people want it to be. And we also have like lots of pieces of pottery where she is depicted as incredibly human with like little bits of like divinity, like the snakes for hair or wings, but she like is otherwise completely anthropomorphic. And I think the same for like the Furies are like that too, where they're like terrifying, but like if you actually see representation of them, they're just nice ladies with snakes in their hair and on their arms, like, and maybe it's just a nature of like Greek art and stuff, but it is always fascinating to me that very, very often if a character on a piece of pottery is labeled as Medusa versus a Gorgon, she actually looks incredibly sympathetic, from what I've seen. And like often considerably less scary than this concept of a Gorgon, which is so explicitly tied to both the just like a Gorgon and also her after her head was removed from her body. And I think that just opens up so many interesting questions about like what they could have seen her when she was alive, because we have almost nothing about that. I don't know. I'm obsessed with Medusa.
I mean,
obviously.
She's incredible, but I think I have to confess some of my cynicism here when it comes to the sort of more anthropomorphic depictions of her. And there's that tiny little voice in my brain that's just like sexualizing monsters and like sexualizing women, where it's like shifting the form from a kind of monstrous head or a monstrous body
into
and
something
turning
you can
it
fuck.
into something you can fuck, into something that you want to fuck. And the complexities of wanting to fuck a monster, and there's all these horrible jokes about, oh yeah, Medusa will get you rock hard, all of that, blah blah blah. but the gaze of Medusa was supposed to be arresting, and so presenting that kind of visual test where it's like, can you still pursue her? Can you still be attracted to her even when you're faced with the power of her gaze to, stop you right where you're standing? So, I mean, I would love to have the generosity and the like open mind to be like, yes, maybe it wasn't all horrible, but just like her having like a tight little body, I'm like, oh, poor Medusa. I like, it's just me being cynical.
No, I think that's incredibly relevant. I think for me, like I definitely, and I'm trying to remember this when I'm writing this piece, like I definitely do get too caught up in the textual sources, because I'm also interested in the fact that the textual sources, for the most part, in terms of like the most ancient of like Greek ones, don't actually describe her as anything. They don't often even like use a word that like suggests monstrosity. Like she's quite sympathetic, particularly in Hesiod, which is like funny because Hesiod's like a pretty objectively shitty guy, not a guy, but in terms of the poetry that we attribute to Hesiod. But like he literally is just like, she was the only mortal Gorgon. She suffered a woeful fate after Poseidon, like, quote unquote, lay with her. But, like, it's a word that is rarely used for consensual sex. And then Perseus killed her. And, you know, and then she birthed children. And that's, like, basically it in terms of Hesiod. Like, the only thing he says is that the Gorgons were daughters of Phorcys and Keto and that she was a mortal one. But, like, yeah, it's just interesting to me that there is also not, like, in the text sources that I'm, you know, most familiar with, there's not, like, a suggestion that she should ever have been feared, or like really even like an acknowledgement that her gaze was stony when her head was on her body, which I'm also just fascinated by. Like, and I think that it's just like a nature of like interpretation of like a broader thing, which is also what you're doing, versus like, yeah, staying maybe too in the weeds in the text sources that do survive. But I think there's something in between, you know, like, I don't know. I think that she's just so interesting because she has like all these questions get opened up, and she is so kind of complex and weird. And yeah, like I won't make this all about Medusa, even though
No,
I
I
could.
mean because I wanna broaden it out even more, and then we can move on to something that's not
No,
Medusa. But I
please.
think, I mean, and this is where I wish I knew more, and I would, really like to know more. But I mean, have you thought much about whether she's a sort of amalgam or reinterpretation of a Near Eastern character or goddess or something like that? I mean, because that might help explain some of the, not like conflicting, but we have the visual representations of her, we have her in the text, we have all these sort of different themes and different understandings of her that we're trying to understand at the same time. So, like, where are the kind of roots of her and her characterization? Because I mean, the Greeks, I'm not sure how much they invented completely off the bat themselves. I don't think it would be the biggest reach that they were like, "Ooh, we like that, but let's like add a little bit of pepper and salt on top and then call it ours."
I mean, that's absolutely what they did for most things, let's be honest. And I think that like I'm definitely gonna look into that, because I could see that being like maybe the visuals. And I say that
that's
because
exactly what I was thinking. Exactly.
Yeah, like I could see it being the visual aspects, because she also, one of the only things that we do know about her is that she lived in the West, which they do tend to give associations like often if if something is aware, a text, a source is aware of Eastern origins, like, or has like some kind of particular connection, like they'll often place them in that area. Like I think of like I just yesterday recorded just a straight reading of book 2 of this is Roman, but Quintus of Smyrna's Fall of Troy. And it's all about Memnon, who's the king of the Ethiopians, and he's a child of Dawn. And so like he literally comes from like where Dawn they figured Dawn kind of like hung out. And it's like Medea is the daughter of the sun, and so she is in the east where the sun comes up. And so it's interesting to me that like that Medusa is in the West, because she like is kind of explicitly near the Hesperides. So she is, she's much more explicitly in the West, which I think Memnon, like they've got him kind of in like West Africa as well for that same reason. So I almost wonder maybe there's like a West African connection then too, and then maybe we have that kind of association with that location. I'm going to do some digging. That's fascinating.
Please do. It was just something that came up in my mind. I was like, there's something here that I think would make it all make more sense.
Well, I'm using this conversation to help me try to write this piece, because I am hitting a wall. So thanks all around. But I want to hear more about monstrous women and also fuckable women and the convergence of the two.
It's a big topic, and I would recommend, have you read I think it's Anne Carson's Woman, Dirt, Desire?
No, I haven't, but I'm going to find that chapter. Thank you. Now I'm obsessed with it. And that's what's going to stay in as a response to, have you read it? Yeah, no, I mean, I've just never, it's weird. I think it's just like access, right? Like I think because I am not in the realm of academia, all of my access to these ideas that are beyond like just the words on the page tend to come from just like what I encounter, like talking to you or talking to anyone else. And I think I am a little, I mean, I know that I am generally like a little too in the weeds with the ancient sources sometimes, because I'm so interested in them as these things that survive and like what they say, literally what they say, that I often have trouble kind of breaking down what might be beyond it. Not because I'm not interested, but just because like I don't, like I don't have the sort of the things that come with studying that in that way. Of that, just like, I don't know, like ideas beyond what is exactly surviving in the sources. And all to say, I'm fascinated and thrilled to be having this conversation, because like I'd never thought of Charybdis as horny, and now it's so obvious. But
there
I also
are so
do
many
think
things that you just can't unsee. Once someone
yes,
pops that bubble, you're like, oh my god.
well, and when it comes to sexuality and stuff, when it like in terms of the ancient world, like, the people that have been providing us with this information, the translations and the like, just all of it for the last couple hundred years are just like boring old white men. And so like obviously that's changing now, thankfully, but it is still like a thing where, what you're going to immediately find is going to be this like sanitized or worse, like anti-woman nonsense. And so it is often kind of hard to find to see something that like is so intentionally kind of like, I guess, unmentioned. Because like I can't believe that I've not heard of or thought of Scylla and Charybdis in that way before, because yeah, it's so obvious now and I fucking love it.
So what's that phrase? Oh, what's that quote? You'll know this quote, where it's like the two worst kind of plights of men, like the sea and women. Like it's right there. It's right there. I can't remember. I'm sure we can find the quote, but it's right there.
Yeah.
The connection between them.
Big dangers, man. Oh my god.
Yeah, like honestly, the main dangers to men. And then also when thinking about Charybdis, I just kept thinking about vagina dentata and all of those,
Yes.
and like honestly, and that's such a massive motif and symbol that, isn't necessarily 100% present in Greek mythology, but
it's
I
not.
They're kind of looking like cousins to me, like a little bit.
Yeah.
Like they're not twins, but like,
Yeah. I mean, it's not a coincidence that most of the monsters in Greek myth are women. Like it's right there. And I mean, yeah, Medusa having been sexualized over the years is fascinating. I do like, in terms of what I said, what I've seen, it's been more recent, like very much Freud level pathologizing. So I'm, more curious about the ancient world, but like, I mean, Scylla and Charybdis, Circe being a temptress, Medea being a temptress, and those aren't even like the monsters. The fact that the Furies are women, the fact that even the Fates are women feels like monstrous in a different way. Like that, like, oh, like the fate of men is determined by women. Like that's another horror kind of in itself.
Well,
I've been thinking about this a lot.
Good. I hope it haunts you, and I say that with all the love in my heart. I hope it haunts you in the way that it haunts me.
It will. It will.
Excellent. I think with a lot of sort of female monstrosity, and this is just another book recommendation for you, but The Monstrous Feminine by Barbara Creed is another really good one. But I think when we look at all of that and all of just sort of the examples you just listed, and even if we add sort of Helen of Troy, who looks out at the sort of field of battle and compares it to a sort of farm, and then we're thinking about the earth and the consumption of the earth and the earth eating all these dead bodies. I think with female monstrosity, it's such an interesting kind of mirror or reflection of the female body's biological productive power. And so you have women being the source of life, and then how do you reconcile that with patriarchal power when women are the ones that are giving you children, women are the ones that are sort of knowing and being able to determine paternity, and then there's this really interesting kind of externalization of that reality into female monstrosity, and you're sort of just watching the ancient Greeks kind of battle with it intellectually because it's so irreconcilable with their power structure.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a reason why they acknowledge that the world started with a woman and then she was immediately subjugated by a man. Immediately. A man
Exactly.
she created.
Ugh.
Like, but then also makes me think of, and I always forget what source this actually comes from, but there's that notion that the Trojan War took place because Gaia was like there was too much pressure on her, and so they needed like a
I know,
cataclysmic
yeah.
war.
I know what you're talking about, but I can't remember where it comes from either. It was
No,
like
I
she's
don't know
too
what it
full
is.
or whatever, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like there were it was too heavy on top of her, the number of humans that existed, and so they needed that kind of like that such a deadly war to like make it better.
That is just such a messed up premise.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's like demonizing the woman, right? Like well, they haven't blamed the Trojan War on another woman enough. So like let's add one. Like it's not enough that it's fully Helen's fault despite the fact that she had absolutely no agency in the whole thing. But let's also make it about Gaia.
God. I don't even know what to say to that. That's just made me so sad.
I mean, it's why I have a career. So at least there's that. Talking about how demonized women are for absolutely no reason in the ancient world. Well, in ancient Greece, very specifically. I mean, and it hasn't gone away. It makes me think I'm sure I've mentioned this on the show before, but like one of the first books of myth that I picked up when I started the show, like, I was like years out of my degree and I really hadn't done any research for a long time. Also, I did my degree, like, this is wild how fast things change, but like, we really didn't get to use Google a lot because it was not early internet, obviously, but it was still a long time ago. And like, so I just feel like I didn't have a great grasp on like how to research and stuff when I picked up the podcast. And so I just like picked up a book that I found because it was just called The Greek Myths. And it at the time I didn't even really notice it, which was funny because I was using it to start my feminist podcast about Greek myth. But like there are parts in this book that was published in like 2005 that are like some of the most horrifically misogynist stuff I've ever read. Like complete departures from the ancient sources in order to demonize both Medusa and Pandora. Those are the ones I always remember. Like, it's wild. Like, as if it's like at one point, this guy, Robin Waterfield, who is credited on the cover, and then the inside cover, it's acknowledged that his wife helped him write it, but she's not on the cover. And in his section on Medusa, retelling the story, like, one, not only does he, in this book called The Greek Myths, does he use Ovid's story without acknowledging that it is not a Greek myth, but he also, in addition to using Ovid's, which like has its own problems, he introduces the idea that that Athena was angry that Medusa was prettier than her, or that Medusa bragged about being prettier than her.
Oh my God.
Yeah, exactly. Like, your shocked face. Is it like,
where is that?
Exactly. It has absolutely no basis in the ancient sources. None. And it's just like this invention to make women even worse. Like, this idea that like, oh, well, in order for Athena to want to curse her, she would have had to say that she was prettier because ladies care whether another girl is prettier than them. Like,
but also, this just drives me triple insane because it's like if you reduce the value of women to what they look like, and then you get upset when they have feelings about what they look like,
right?
What like, is expected? What is expected here?
I really wonder why women ever worry about whether they're pretty compared to other women. Like, it's not coming naturally. like as somebody who was a teen, like 14 in 2002, I think is like an incredibly important date milestone. Like just the early 2000s and the pressure placed on young women at that time when Kate Moss is out there saying nothing tastes as good as pretty feels. Like, this stuff that we get blamed for, like, it's just anyway. I think a lot about how broken I still am from just like being a teenager in the early 2000s.
We had the whole thigh gap thing run through my high school when I was 16. That was fun.
Right. Yeah, that's our little that's our age gap, the thigh gap, and I do not envy you because I was old enough at that time. I was definitely still influenced. But like, yeah, I mean, we just like, it was wild. And like the fat shaming on every single TV show that we had to watch. Like there was just no way to get out of it, to get out of hating your body. Like you're literally raised from the time that you're like 8 years old to hate multiple things about your body. Yeah. Anyway, I respect all the women who have been able to get over it, but I am still trying and not going
Broadly,
great.
Most women are in the trenches with it.
Yeah. Oh, fucking fascinating. Anyway, oh my gosh. I've just like, I mean, I think a lot about the fact that the ancient Greeks did turn women into monsters, but I haven't thought about the sexuality involved.
Well, I think just to speak about an earlier point you mentioned, which is, when it comes to translation and when it comes to so many of the translations being, as horrific and horrible as they are, it's like that on the one hand is so unequivocally true and needs to be addressed. But I think as well, what I find, and I'm sure you really find this too, when you're dealing with the ancient sources and when we're in the very privileged position of being able to engage with the literature and the visuals, that you do have to have an awareness, I think, of not projecting. I think we joked about rosy colored glasses before, where it's, I want to think it was this gorgeous utopia, but you also have to hold space for the reality. It was a patriarchal society. We know enough to know that women by and large were not having a great time. And so it's like, how do you kind of tread that line between reclamation and kind of looking at this stuff with a new, more empowering lens, whilst also not dismissing what we know of what was happening to these women? And I mean, and that's so difficult, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's just so many things at once. Because like
all the complexities, all of them.
Yeah. And I mean, it is what I love about looking at the ancient world, and what I particularly love about like the point that my show is at now in speaking about this stuff, like the ability I have now to talk about the context that I didn't have before when I was just like a random woman picking up a book at a bookstore without any idea, like, what I guess really goes into men writing these myths. And by that I mean like rewriting the myths, because the book that I find to be so egregious is one of those ones where, like it's just called the Greek myths because a man went and like took down notes on the sources and then rewrote them. I mean, granted, he's doing what I'm doing, but I'm really open about how fucking biased I'm being, and the men are not. And until you kind of realize what goes into the retelling of these kinds of stories, like you really don't know that what you're getting is nonsense compared to the ancient sources, but then at the same time it lacks this context of like, it's wild because it's like, I feel like the modern pieces you pick up written by men tend to be in, obviously, like, stuff in the last like 5 years, and certain men, obviously it's not the case, but like by and large, like you think that it's going to be worse, and then it is, but then at the same time, like the context then turns around and it's like, well, the context though is the women also had a shit time, but the myths still weren't quite as bad as this modern man is making them out to be. But we have to keep in mind that, like, especially when we're talking about Athens, like women had little to no freedom or agency at all. And I don't know. I mean, it's just like kind of constant sort of reminders of all of the different bits and pieces going into this stuff. But I also like to think about like the stories that the women might have been telling amongst themselves, or, I like to joke a lot about all the sex they probably were having with each other because the men didn't consider it sex and so weren't worried that you
It
know.
was all chill.
Yeah, exactly. Like, they were just like keeping their wives locked up all together in a house all day, not letting them do, anything outside of it. Like, you think they're not going to find ways of having fun? Like, these women.
Haven't you seen all those pots of women with bread dildos? Do you know the ones I'm talking about?
I mean, also, yeah, like the Elizbos, right? That's like the ancient word for dildo. Ancient Greek word.
Lesbos, did you say? Elizbos.
Olisbos. It's like
Olisbos.
OLISBOS.
Okay,
If
I'm
you
writing
just
that
Google
down.
it, I know Google just says dildo real big. But I also did learn it from Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I will clarify.
That makes
Because
me
at one
so
point
happy.
you do go get a dildo that Alcibiades left in somebody's house.
At least it was in someone's house
game
and
is
not
fun.
in someone. Right.
True. No, exactly. You don't
Small
have
victories.
to go pull it out of somebody. I mean, it's Alcibiades. You never know.
What's that medieval myth or whatever it is about the sword? Okay, I digress. I digress.
I always digress. It's the point.
No.
Yeah.
Oh no, I was just thinking about your point on translation, and I think, and this being completely frank with you, I don't think I 100% have a grip on this, and I've been studying this stuff for 7 years, but I think something that's so hard to grasp is that the myths themselves are being received and massaged and adapted over hundreds and hundreds of years, and that is something that does not get kind of foregrounded in the way that I think it needs to, because we're talking about, okay, the ancient stuff is over here, and then the modern dudes are over here. And it's like, well, actually, the ancient stuff, there was a whole bunch going on then when it comes to refracting and massaging these myths for different kind of cultural moments and different purposes. And that is such an important thing to understand, like how these myths were functioning over, you can't just kind of point to ancient Greece and be like, that was all one thing, it happened over 3 years, whatever. It's like, that's so far from the case. And still, it like honestly kind of breaks my brain a little bit whenever I try and like contemplate it too much. But I feel like it's important to note when it comes to translation and different versions of mythology.
Yeah. No, I'm so glad you brought that up, because in the last couple of years, I know that I've become annoying in the way that I bring that up. I bring that up in like almost every episode though, because I also like, I can't guarantee that people have been listening to all of them. They just might jump in, and I'm like, well, then I have to remind you that we are talking like minimum 800 years in between all of these stories. And when you just come at this from this casual viewpoint, yeah, you see ancient Greece as a concept. You see Greek myth as a concept, as if there is this like canon of stories and everything is
there was
decided.
A canon. I thought there was a canon.
People will use the word canon.
I was like, there's one version of every myth. There was one version of every myth, and everyone agreed, and it was super chill and easy and straightforward. Are you glad that it wasn't you this time?
Thrilled. And that you sounded just as like excited and annoyed.
It is both. It is always both.
It is so both. And I think that, yeah, like unless you are deep in this stuff, like you're not getting that context. And it's so important.
And also, again, being like very candid with you, just because you're deep in it doesn't mean it's the easiest thing to understand or comprehend or hold in your mind. It is so difficult.
All I ever do is talk about how confusing and fascinating it is. Like, yeah, because it's both all the time. And I love it.
All of the times.
Truly. I mean, okay, but I really want to know more about the like the idea you mentioned that they feared women's sexual appetites. I want to know more about this so bad.
So bad. So fear, I mean, it's such a big topic, right? Like fear of female sexuality. I'm like, oh, can we have 3 hours? Are you wanting to kind of talk about, I mean, I assume mythology and like maybe I'm trying to pick some points here because it's
Absolutely
such
fair.
a
I mean, I don't care necessarily to stick to mythology. I'm just fascinated by the idea. But like, if you have like I mean, I guess I always just like understood that it would have been a thing, but I've just never thought about like evidence for it other than, just the general distaste they seem to have for women.
I mean,
But yeah, like yeah.
there's a strong distaste, right? But I think there's also a huge amount of distrust of
Yeah.
women. And I think that, and this is a very sort of one-dimensional view of it, but what I have read over the years is that, patrilineal inheritance, when you can't be 100% sure of, the paternity of your kid, that gonna be a problem. Like, that is an
Enter
issue.
Zeus.
Like, right? Enter
Yeah.
Zeus. Literally,
Yeah.
unfortunately, in most
Yeah.
cases. So harrowing. Um, and so there's this fear of how the female body can obscure paternity, right? Like, they
Mhm.
could have like a woman could have your brother's kid, or, a random neighbor's kid or whatever, and probably there would be no way of you knowing. And so if your entire society is built on, you will have sons and it will all be lovely and they will inherit your house and da 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 da, but your wife could be messing around on you and you almost certainly have no way of knowing. So how do you, within society, find a way to sort of curtail that or address that? And it's like, just, you know, beat the shit out of them culturally when it comes
Yeah.
to their sexual expression, and just like put them in their tiny little boxes and hide them away. All of that, like, there was this huge societal pressure for the restriction of female sexuality. And I mean, for another bit of evidence, you have the separation between the wife and the hetairai, right? Like, the
Mhm.
hetairai are the fun, drunk ones who will, take part in orgies with you and your boyfriends at the symposium, but your wife is at home looking after the grain and the kids and the whatever. And there's so much sort of separation in the literature as far as how you think of, ancient sex workers versus ancient wives. They were constituted and characterized completely differently. So there's little room left for the kind of eroticism of the wife. And then if we take it back to like Helen of Troy or something, it's like we see what happens when a wifely person, or, the figure of a wife, expresses their sexuality, or even just is an object of sexual desire. Like, it's seen to be a really dangerous, dangerous thing. I feel like I just threw such random broad examples at you.
No, I love it so much. I'm literally taking notes. I've just written down obscuring paternity. Like, it's a great bank form that apparently I'm turning into a notepad. Um, no, yeah, it's. I also made me think of I'm trying to remember like the exact details, but I know that in Sparta they kind of, for a time at least, like handled this fear of paternity by being like, women can have kids with more than one man, because they also were so obsessed with keeping it Spartan and like keeping their bloodlines pure.
Oh, sounds very
Um
Targaryen. I'm rewatching Game of Thrones at the moment.
I mean, Targaryens are Spartans, let's be honest. Actually,
That's for
like
the next episode.
I feel like that works in ways. Um but like, no, and I've definitely, I want to say I've thought about this idea of enter Zeus, of like, is the stories of the gods broadly fathering children by mortal women, like, that is just it's like exemplifying, there's a better word, that's not it.
That's a good word.
It is, but not for what I want. But basically, it's just like, it's evidence for this fear, right? It's like, well, like, if you have to worry whether the child is yours, then at least you can think that maybe if it's not, then it's Zeus's. Like,
Right. So it gives
the
you like a divine out.
exactly. Like, if this is like a big fear of theirs, then of course they're going to introduce these stories that explain that happening, but in a way that takes the fault away from the man.
Mm-hmm.
Like, not that it's,
Yeah.
a man's fault broadly, but like, it's clearly their fear, when I imagine it's not a thing that's like happening all that often. Like, but of course they're going to be afraid of it because they don't control that. And
Mm.
if you control everything, then the one thing you can't control becomes this like enormous boogeyman.
To your point about that boogeyman, I would say that I think there might actually be another boogeyman in this instance. So it's not only about sort of paternity and issues of paternity. I think it might also be about the way female sexuality and feminine sexuality can prompt transgressive action on the part of the man. So they're worried about what they'll do and their kind of loss of agency and not being in full control of themselves and starting a war or, sleeping with someone they shouldn't or any of the other things that are so richly demonstrated in all of the mythology. And so if you have that kind of fear of there's this certain part of life and there's this certain aspect of the woman and the female body and feminine erotic power, how do we deal with it? Because it poses this threat to civilization and stable order and family structure and political order and everything. What do we do? Oh, maybe we channel some of it into these wild, feminized, hungry monsters that are just eating everyone. It sounded unhinged when I said it, but I'm standing by it.
No, but I mean, like, yes, like, but I mean, they're almost all women. Like, Typhon is an interesting example, but I think he pretty openly embodies like natural disasters. So the idea that like that all the monsters are either like natural disasters or women is like kind of amazing, because even the Gigantomachy like accounts for volcanoes, and so it's like literally any of the big bad, divine kind of fears, they are, if they're men. Trying to think of a male monster
Minotaur.
that,
Minotaur. That's the only one I've
right,
got.
okay, but
That's
he
one.
doesn't actually count because he embodies the fear of paternity.
Ding, ding,
So like,
ding. See, the
yeah, so
rabbit
like,
hole just gets deeper. And it's
yeah,
also in the myths, what do you do with monsters? You defeat them. You
yeah,
overpower them. It is something that gets set up in the myths as something that can be thwarted or defeated. So you can defeat the temptation of the female body. You can defeat the monstrous feminine in all of this mythology. So all these lovely men can just sleep at night, knowing that it's all going to be okay.
yeah. I mean, okay, talking about the paternity stuff, like, it leads me to just think of all the weirdest ways that Zeus impregnated.
Oh.
Right? Like, at first I thought of
Every
the
time I look at
swan.
a swan, every time I look at a
Yeah.
swan, I get upset. Every single time.
Well, yeah, the swan's the first thought. But then I went to Zeus and Danae, Perseus's mom, right? Shower of gold. And like, obviously, golden shower is a different context. Now, but what's really happening here, cuz like, the context for that story is that she's like locked in a tower because her father is worried, there's an oracle that says her baby will defeat him. So she's locked away so that she cannot have a child, and Zeus's form that he takes is this like gold falling from the ceiling and just going straight up her vag, like, it, I like to think of it as like, it feels like it has to be like a real, like a like a like it has to be embodied in some kind of way. I don't know. I think a lot about the shower of gold. But how that, like, this thing that is like, it sounds more like a fatherly fear in this patriarchal world of their daughter getting impregnated by some strange man. It's like so regularly happening. But it's possible, that like it embodies that, but then it's like, oh, but even if that happened, well, I guess it's not a great thing for Acrisius, but like, it's Perseus in the end, this baby, and he still tries to. I mean, now I'm trying to think of. Basically, I'm just like thinking aloud with you right now, because now I'm like, okay, well, you know, he's Perseus, so really ultimately he's a good thing, but like he does defeat Acrisius, and so I'm just, you know, I feel like there's layers to this fear, because sometimes it's obvious what they're fearing.
Well, and then in that instance, right, isn't it the fear of violating the like virginal female, because what that means for the social and financial standing of the family?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
that's a
but
big
then it's
fear.
interesting because it's like it works out. So that's where my question mark brain is going. You know, like obviously the story of Perseus is good for Perseus and Danae in the end. So it's just interesting to me because it's like, well, is it providing a moral that then is like contradictory to this idea of being afraid for your daughter's virginity? You know, it's just, I don't know. It's
Or
interesting.
maybe
There's,
is
I
it
think
like
there's layers.
ultimately affirming it or kind of giving some comfort? Like just like a bit
Yeah.
of a nice myth.
Right.
Just be like,
Yeah.
sometimes it works out.
It could be you. Probably won't.
Probably
Yeah.
won't, but maybe.
I mean, there's just so many layers. Like, people often ask me, like, to kind of, I guess, put myself into the character and, like, answer questions like, what would they feel or what would they think? And I fail at that always just miserably because I'm far too interested in the story itself and the purpose behind it. And I think this is great evidence for that. Like, this is what I want to talk about is like, but what's the story and what does it mean? Not the characters. Like, I love the characters, but I don't feel the need to like be in their brains,
But I also
you
think you
know?
show an awareness of how difficult it is to ever get to anywhere remotely close to being in their brains. Like
Yeah,
that
because we don't
is
know anything.
no, and that's such a difficult thing. You know, there are so many sort of feminist retellings of Greek myths now that are doing exactly that, right? They're, you know, giving voices, they're providing insight and all of that. But if you're trying to do that entirely based on the ancient sources, like
You're fucked.
yeah, you're fucked. You need a hell of a lot of imagination and creative license to begin to do that. It's, you know, it's a very appealing thing, but is it necessarily possible if you actually tie yourself to the ancient source material?
Yeah.
I don't know. Again,
No, I
I want to
agree.
believe
Yeah.
it's true, but I'm like, ugh. Especially when almost every source bar like two are coming from men.
Well,
Uh,
yeah.
oh.
Yeah. No, and yeah, it's interesting because it's interesting for me talking to authors and stuff sometimes because like I understand that they have a version in their head of this character because you have to you create a version, but that inherently untethers it from the ancient sources, and that's
I think
fine.
that's the perfect verb choice. Like untethers it. That's exactly what it is, right?
Like, yeah,
Like
I
you're
was
lopping off
incredibly proud
some
of
of
that
what
word.
anchors you.
Yeah.
That's the perfect word for it.
Yeah, you have to separate it. You have to make it a different thing, and I think, you know, like that if you are writing this stuff and trying to pretend, or if you believe that you are keeping true to the characters, like I think you're doing a disservice to yourself and the book. Like I do think you have to separate that. Yeah. Oh, this is sad, and maybe it's a little bit more than what we need time wise. But I realized when we first talked about like how I barely remembered, other than I just knew I wanted to talk to you about it on the show. But you were just like, just mention Medea and we'll go. And I realized we've not even gone through
Well, I
Medea.
mean,
But
we
yeah.
haven't spoken about Medea and we haven't spoken about Euripides Bacchae as far as fear of the female and female
Oh
sexuality
my
and
god.
female
Okay.
monstrosity. And if we're talking about the like kind of turning women into monsters because of their biological power, I mean, ding, 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 Medea, who not only murders a whole bunch of people, she murders her children. So you have the complete arresting of feminine biological power, and that is why she is the most hated and the biggest monster. And it is just, and then I love that she just gets to ride off in a chariot. And I don't
I
care
mean,
what
yeah.
anyone says. I know a cannon isn't real, but her riding off on a chariot is canon to me. It is
Well, I mean,
canon to me.
it is just as it has the exact same level of legitimacy as her killing her children because both were invented by Euripides. So
That's so true.
I know,
That's so true.
which I was gonna bring that up anyway because I'm fascinated by the idea that, and I mean, it could be a source that we've lost. Like it could be that Euripides did not invent that detail. That's very possible. Same with the dragon chariot though. But like, yeah, the idea that like before Euripides, we didn't necessarily have this idea that she killed her children. I think that's really interesting.
Mm.
And also like is another good connection to the Bat guy, because I mean, I could talk about Euripides for hours, so I will try not to, but like I like to think of like kind of why he would put that stuff in, because of all the playwrights I know. Like, and I say this with confidence, despite the fact that I'll never talk to him, but I know that he was interested in women as people and
Mm.
as like complex and sympathetic and very real people, though, like flawed people. But yeah, I love that he kind of introduced that idea, because I think it
I mean,
adds something more.
I think it definitely adds something more. And like, do you think that him, him being Euripides, shout
Mhm.
out, do you think
My best friend.
Euripides, I know, I love him so much. But do you think him adding that detail, I mean, considering that women were so often wildly reduced to their ability to create children, and motherhood was the whole thing, that was their entire sort of source of value and all of that, and so by Euripides adding that detail, it kind of is this a horrific, monstrous assertion of individual agency of a woman, but that's what it is. It's like her own feelings of rage and sexual jealousy and violation and betrayal are big enough and strong enough that they actually supersede her role as mother. And that is something we almost never see. The only other myth that's jumping to mind is it Philomela and no, Procne. I'm
Oh
thinking
yeah,
Procne.
that's
That's
the
what.
two of them. Yeah, they're
Yes,
sisters.
okay.
So you've got both
So
names.
okay, good. That makes me.
Yeah.
I was like, am I about to say like Thumbelina on the show? That doesn't.
No,
That's
yeah.
not correct.
No, and I mean, yeah, they're another good connection, but they're interesting too because they also really only survive in Ovid, which is sort of like its own level of like interest, like in terms of those details. But I absolutely do think, and now you've made me think it even more. I won't pretend that this was all my idea before you said all of that, but I've always seen. Like I've definitely spent a number of episodes on the show having to explain that I'm not saying that it's okay that she killed her children, just
No
that
one is saying that. No one is saying that.
no,
Let's be really clear. We're not endorsing infanticide.
no,
No,
but no, but like I do think that it is incredibly interesting because you can see that there is like an intention behind it, because he makes her sympathetic while she's doing it. Like
Mhm.
you understand her. You don't agree with her, but you understand why she feels like this is the thing she has to do. And that's what I find to be so fucking interesting about that play, but also just about Euripides broadly, because I think that argument, like it completely, it aligns with my thoughts on him and what I said earlier, which is just that like he makes women into people,
Mhm.
flawed people, complex people, people who have thought processes that like we won't, not everyone would agree with, and maybe it's bad to kill your kids. Like, but at the same time, he's not introducing a villain in Medea. He's not introducing a boogeyman. He is introducing an interesting, complex woman who makes a horrific decision. But like, yeah, he doesn't make her this like caricature
Mm.
of an angry woman. I think that she has become that in pop culture in a lot of ways since then. Like before I really knew the play, all I'd ever known is like there's a woman in Medea who killed her kids, and you think, but like I even feel like, oh, I wish I could tell you what this is from, but there's definitely like a quote that lives in my head from a movie or something from the early 2000s where it's like she pulled a Medea, and it was like basically the idea of her going crazy. Like I think she became aligned with this idea of going crazy and killing her kids, when in fact the play makes very clear that she is in her right and rational mind and she is making this decision. And that's so much more interesting than this like caricature of a woman who goes mad and kills her
Mm.
children because it's the only way that women could do that, you know?
Well, I think there might even be more kind of tension in that, because Exactly, like in Euripides particularly, her every single, line that she delivers is so considered and it's so thoughtful. And so and she's wailing off stage and it's all of this. She is very emotional. She's in a lot of, emotional pain from
Hmm.
everything that's happening and everything that's being done to her. But you're exactly right in pointing out that this isn't what she does is a very considered act, or a considered set of actions. And I think, she is acting, you know, from a place of emotional pain, but not from a place of temporary insanity, because planning goes into every step of it. And I read this article a few years ago, which I found really fascinating, which was all about how Medea is kind of working within and drawing from this kind of outdated mode of Homeric honor that
Hmm.
and it not only like doesn't have a place necessarily in the time that Euripides was writing, so that's one kind of bit of separation, but it absolutely is not for women. That's not something for her to grab a hold of and then use. But in so much of the language she's talking about, she is Achilles. Her honor has been violated and she is going to rain down fury. And so then when you're looking at the characterization of Medea, and in kind of one hand you hold the sexual jealousy and the betrayal of the marriage bed, and that which is in there, and then in the other hand you have this kind of, she's this wounded proud hero that wants justice and wants balance. And that, especially when you look at the language, and again I will send you this article because it's
Yeah.
such an awesome take on her, that there's so much more richness in that interpretation rather than, oh, she went batshit. It's like, no, 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 she didn't. She is Achilles in the tent. She is Achilles dragging Hector's body around the walls of
Yeah.
Troy.
I was
Like,
just gonna say that one. Like,
that
yeah.
is Medea. Like, that is so
Yeah.
much more true to Euripides and true to, all of the versions of her story. It seems like, and again, we have a woman being reduced and hugely oversimplified, where when you look a bit deeper, there's something so much more interesting going on.
Mm-hmm. Ugh. I mean, I could talk about Medea for hours. Like, and Euripides, he's just so interesting.
Well, I mean, should we
Uh,
talk about the back eye? Do we have time?
yes, please. No, please, please. I want to talk about the back guy. Like, I
Oh, I mean,
mean,
we have sex, we have sexuality, we have Pentheus in all kinds of situations when it comes to his desire. We have the kind of bestial, hypersexual, animalistic, monstrous women, ripping animals apart and ripping people apart on the hills. Like, all of that, it's just right there. It's just sensational.
yeah.
It's like, yes, you should all be
And
scared of women, because when they get drunk, they're going to rip your arm off.
all of that, and I also think it's interesting that Dionysus is quite feminized. Like, you know, like I mean, I know he's like very a he, but he's dressed like a Maenad, isn't he? Or
Hmm.
like, yeah, like, so
Doesn't he dress
there's
as a
this,
Maenad, and then Pentheus is like, oh, oh.
yes, kind of, and then also he has Pentheus dressed as a Maenad to be torn up, right? So like I had a conversation years ago now on the show about like a non-binary reading of Dionysus in Bacchae, but it also included, this was with Emma Pauley, and they had really interesting things to say from like a more dramatizing aspect of it. Like they're a dramaturg and I think a translator as well, so like just kind of everything going on there. But like the argument was basically that both Dionysus and Pentheus have these moments where they can be pretty easily read as non-binary. And I think, and it's really interesting because like Dionysus appears like that pretty openly, I think, in the play. But there are these moments where you can kind of, if you're looking for it, like see Pentheus like recognizing that in Dionysus and being really interested in it. And then that kind of transitions directly into Pentheus, dressing as a woman to be torn apart. But I mean, yeah, there's so many layers in the back guy.
But
Like
I
the
mean,
fact that,
exactly. And then there's
yeah,
like appeal of transgression, and there's
yeah,
appeal of all of that. And then we're back to female monsters, where it's like that which is simultaneously seductive and terrifying. That's the whole thing in my mind.
Well, and in that case too, they're your family members, which is like adding a whole other level. Like, yes, ladies are monsters, but like even when they're your mom and your
But
aunts.
also, if we want to get real psychoanalytical and weird with it, maybe especially when they're your mom. I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know.
I
There's
mean,
like the unpayable biological debt to the mother is something that patriarchy finds difficult to deal with.
ooh. I mean, it's also like not I, I mean, it's I don't want to say coincidence because I don't think it's either a coincidence or not one, but like it is relevant that this
It
is
is
happening in the city.
noteworthy.
Yes, that this is happening in the city that will go on to house Oedipus and Jocasta, like another few generations down the line. Like, and of course, like when it comes to the plays, like there is something to be said for the fact that these are Athenians intentionally demonizing Thebes, but at the core, Thebes is the location of these myths, regardless of whether they appeared in a play. So I just think it's interesting. Like Thebes is, I don't know, I have a soft spot for Thebes because I am deeply obsessed with Cadmus and Harmonia, and the fact that like they are both incredibly important and like really lacking in a lot of detail, and like there's a lot of really really interesting things about them that I'll never stop thinking about. But like the fact that this is like partly their family line has always really intrigued me too. But this idea of like the unpayable debt to the mother, like I don't think a lot about procreation because I hate children, and the idea of pregnancy I
That's so
think is
valid.
utterly revolting.
That's so
But
valid.
thinking about it this way is very interesting.
I think for me it's something that comes up in a lot of psychoanalysis, especially like later
Hmm.
psychoanalysis. And like I'm not a huge fan of Freud, but I'm a fan of some people that came like 30 years later and some women that came 30 years later and looked
Hmm.
at some of this stuff. And so there's this very spicy take on I don't I don't know if you'll find this as fascinating as I do, but someone wrote an article on the abject maternal in Aeschylus's Agamemnon, and it was all about Clytemnestra and the kind of reversal of the sex act when she penetrates Agamemnon to murder him, and then the red blood spurts up on her and like fertilizes her, and I think that's where I was telling you about the word Ganos
Oh yeah.
all those weeks ago. But then they focused on the image of the red rugs drawing Agamemnon back into his home, and they said it was like some sort of perverted umbilical cord like dragging him back to a tomb. And so it's the whole womb to tomb thing. It's really cuckoo. I know it's really cuckoo. I hold my hands up. But I mean, it
It's
yeah,
interesting.
it's interesting. I'm not sure it
Yeah.
like 100% holds up, but those kind of
Yeah.
ideas of the female body and the connections drawn between the female body and the oikos or the household, and how the household was kind of a site of a lot of these dangers, and these dangers are embodied in the women that lurk within the house. It intrigues me.
I mean, yeah, no, same. I definitely find that super interesting, but I also just immediately makes me think like that really gives a whole new meaning to the fact that we get the idea of rolling out the red carpet from that play.
Is that where we get it from?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Like it's already a fucked up phrase by the fact that the idea of rolling out the red carpet, that phrase fully comes originally from Agamemnon being welcomed home to his death.
Oh my
But
God.
yeah, I know. I've told that to other people and it's a really lovely revelation.
Yeah.
Because it is
But now
super like
made like so much less lovely by what I've
yeah.
just told you.
No, but like I think that's way better. Like, the idea that we can also then read rolling out the red carpet into being like, yeah, like this. Because I also, as you started talking about it, I was like, I don't know, are you going to go to like a period blood kind of situation? Like, I think that's not that far from it either. Like, just a full or like just like just a full birthing kind of analogy, like
It's so unhinged. It is so unhinged. But when you
I
think
love it.
about the fact that Pentheus is ripped apart by his mother, there's
Yeah.
lots about, issues of the maternal, whether it's Medea or, is it Agave? Is that Pentheus's mom?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or Agave, or, yeah. It's, let alone Jocasta, dear old Jocasta.
Oh, Jocasta. I mean, oh, it's so good. I'm just gonna think about the fear of female sexuality and everything now, which is funny because I kind of already have, but like less specifically.
Oh yeah.
I'm like
It's a very
constantly,
real thing.
yeah. I love being scary. I
Mm,
just love finding, like, I mean, anything that we talked about like the complexity of anything being empowering for women in the ancient world. But I think regardless of the poor women back then, it is empowering now to learn this stuff,
definitely.
to just like look back and be like, fuck, they were so afraid of women.
Yeah.
Like, and it remains today. Men are so afraid of women and like power and agency and female emotion and rage and
Or also like the
oh
kind of literal objectification and fragmentation of the female body into vessels. Like
yes,
turning the female body
yes,
into
full
stuff
circle,
to drink
please.
from.
Like, oh my
Like to
god.
drink from and to like store wine, and like the jars have nipples. Like it's just the archaeological evidence, let alone like all of the votives of the female body and all of those figurines and all
Yeah.
of that. There's just this huge kind of breaking down of the woman, and even like the weird sort of compartmentalization between, the wife and the hetera, and
Yes.
they devoted a lot of time and energy to it.
Yeah. Well, there's just so much. Like, I want to know it all, but it's just I mean, we didn't even get to like all of like the full level of the detail of porn pottery
Well, this
that
is what
like
I wanted to ask
exists.
you, is like
Yeah.
how, because I have so many visuals. I have so many visuals, but
Oh,
it's like, how do we, I don't know.
I know. Yeah, I mean, there's only so many things I can do with social media and people rarely see it, but like maybe we need to figure out something for a future. Maybe
Yeah.
I mean, I hate the idea of video, but we could try to do a video special. Or maybe we team up with Erica and the three of us do
Do
something.
like a YouTube dream.
Yeah, because Erica's not afraid of video like I am. It's just like, look, it's just so fucking interesting.
Mm.
This, I mean, I always knew they were afraid, but like, I love this extra level that you have bestowed upon me through these drinking vessels. Like,
You are so welcome. And once you see the connection between hypersexual women and monstrous women, it is so hard to unsee.
Scylla and Charybdis, like,
My
I
girls, my
mean,
girls, my ladies.
just a gaping, swirling hole. Just you get lost in it. You get lost in it.
Get eaten by it. What a way to go.
Oh my god. Okay, so I'm perpetually like kind of walking a line for how much I share about the novel that I've been working on, like on the podcast, because it's not done, and also like this is me trying to get used to the fact that I've written what I've written. But I think I'm just gonna like start wrapping this up by telling the listeners that when you and I met in person, I was like, I think you're the right person to help me with the fact that I really need an ancient Greek word, because I've been reading a lot of romance novels, and I needed a more relevant one, and that's where this Ganos word that you mentioned earlier comes in. This word used for like the spurting of Agamemnon's blood when Clytemnestra stabbed him, and it's just so good. But I also love because I looked it up
Liquid
on Perseus.
gladness.
Liquid gladness. I forgot about that. I feel like, you know what? Perseus does not use that definition, and I'm glad that you reminded me of it. When I clicked on it in Perseus, it was like only Agamemnon, and it was just, I forget what it was, but I'm going to go find it again. Either way, liquid gladness is getting written down right now.
Yes, that fertilizes the plains. It's just so much.
I love it so much. This episode is fucking perfect. I just, okay. I'm going to tell you something, but after I wrapped up on the microphone. This was the greatest thing ever. Do you want to tell my listeners where they can hear and learn more from you? Please.
Thank you so much for having me. I am Cosi's Odyssey on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok, and I have got this YouTube series that you can find. Yes, over on Proper Layer Productions. I've actually got a few more projects coming up this year, so keep your eyes peeled. I might live into one. Yes, that's a threat.
Please, I'm down.
Yeah, so I'm on literally every platform, and thank you again for having me. This has been sort of as unhinged and joyful as I thought it would be, and somehow even more so. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Agree entirely. I both saw this coming and did not. It exceeded expectation. But I will link to everything in the episode's description so they can follow you. And I'll just say that, yeah, like as Cosi's Odyssey, you followed me and messaged me like probably 6 years ago. And we were both little babies. And it's just such a joy. It's so fun. And I mean, we didn't even like talk that much in the in-between, but just to let the listeners know, we met in person in Athens a couple months ago, and it was just truly like we were just immediately old friends, which was very lovely.
It was so comforting. I was like, yes, internet friend, real friend.
For real. But it made this episode far more joyful than it could have been. So it worked out so well. Oh, well, nerds. That was a joy. Just truly, oh my god, we had so much fun. So you can find more from Cosi on in the episode's description. I have linked to everything. And check out Propylaia Productions. They are doing some really cool stuff when it comes to video. And also the Erica that we mentioned is, of course, Erica Stevenson from Moan Inc., who is putting out some really awesome content on YouTube. Hence the joke about her not being afraid of video. And she's also involved with Propylaia Productions. So check out everything that Cosi has done because it's wonderful. And also, like, I think you probably want to follow somebody who talks about boob cups, like, academically, you know? Thank you all so much for listening. Let's Talk About Myths, Baby is written and produced by me, Liv Albert. Michaela Smith is the Hermes to my Olympians. Is that what I say? My brain has stopped working. Michaela's the assistant producer. Laura Smith is the audio engineer and production assistant. The podcast is part of the iHeart Podcast Network. Listen on Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. And just, you know, a big thank you. On Tuesday, we should be starting the Bronze Age Collapse series, provided I can write enough of this Medusa book in time. If not, it'll just be the week later. I guess you'll just have to wait and see. I am Liv, and I love this shit. Even if it means that I don't know how I write so much. It's a thing. It's fun, but it is exhausting.